Thank you, everybody. Today's guest panelists include Jan Hawken, the director of Our Bodies, Our Doctors. Yes, big round of applause. Jan is a professor emeritus of psychology at Portland State University, a clinical psychologist, and a documentary filmmaker. Dr. Andrea Shiverini, who you all may recognize as one of the abortion care providers featured in the film. Dr. Shiverini is an OBGYN provider who specializes in family planning and addiction medicine. She attended and graduated from Oregon Health Sciences University School of Medicine and has over 19 years of diverse experience. And finally, our last guest panelist is Judith Arcana, who you would also recognize from the film. A writer of poems, stories, essays, and books. She is a Jane, aka a member of the Chicago Underground Service that helped thousands of people get safe, illegal abortions before the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Roe v. Wade, January 1973. So welcome again to each of our speakers. Let's just take a few minutes to introduce ourselves. So Jan, go ahead.
Thank you all for being here. I think some of you have been here during earlier screenings of the film, but there's something special about this screening after the situation with Roe v. Wade being overturned. I was initially approached by the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor OBGYN department to do 2 short films in 2017 on the experiences of abortion providers and how they deal with abortion stigma. And I did those 2 short films, which are available to watch, one in Kenya and one in the US, and became very interested in the course of those projects in how to look at abortion from the perspective of people who do this work, who get up every day and walk the gauntlet of people who shame them and threaten them, and even stigma in their own field of healthcare, and what sustains them. And I became very interested in not only casting them as heroes, but what kinds of commitments and vision of healthcare and feminist principles guide their involvement and sustained commitment to this work. So I felt like they needed a full feature documentary, so I continued with this project. Many of you here today have supported that in various ways over the years. And I also felt like, people associate abortion access with Planned Parenthood, which is kind of the biggest player in the field of abortion care, but there's a whole history of independent feminist clinics. I worked in the Feminist Women's Health Center as a nurse in the 1970s in LA, and these clinics have historically provided about 60% of the abortions in this country, and they've trained residents and fellows. They have, I think, also developed feminist principles of care that go beyond access to how you think about other forms of support for women and the dignity of women who often come out of situations where they're shamed or led to feel bad about themselves about this decision. And so I think a lot of the providers who decided to be part of this, Andrea, you can speak to this, wanted to speak to more of the complexity, reclaim the complexity of abortion and what feminist principles of care mean, and the history of this struggle that is about abortion, but it's about more than abortion. It's about women's autonomy, it's about visions of healthcare, it's about how we think about sexuality and other issues that drive the abortion debate. So how I think we're now in a place where it's important to learn from that history and the insights and the daily experience of people who provide this care. So I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Hi. So I was approached by Jan when I was providing abortion care at Downtown Women's Center uh, because she was starting to do the initial project. And at the time, I'd been providing abortion care in some form or fashion since I was 20, before I ever even decided to go to medical school. And I'd always been sort of on the fence about how public I wanted to be or was willing to be. And I'd done a few things, but my children were pretty little and obviously knew people who'd been murdered and things like that. So I was, things like that, just stuff. So I was a little hesitant about it, but at that point I was like, you know what, honestly, like, fuck it. This is what I do, I'm gonna talk about it. And then we just sort of started doing the project, and then when she came back and said, hey, this is my idea about doing a feature-length film, I was really excited about it because I did sort of grow up in the independent clinic movement. When I first moved to Portland when I was 20, I started volunteering at the Feminist Women's Health Center over by the, near the Moda Center. It's not there anymore, but I did it sort of just as a, wanting to be an activist in reproductive justice, and I thought, I'll be answering phones and filing papers. And they started training me. The first thing I did was I took care of people after they had their abortions, and I counseled them in birth control and how to take care of themselves and what to expect after they went home. And I thought, oh my gosh, I love this so much. I love teaching. I love being able to work with all of these people that are coming from different places. And it really inspired me to explore whether or not I wanted to work in healthcare. And I went through a lot of different processes about deciding what I wanted to do. And ultimately, I decided to become a medical doctor because I wanted to be able to do abortions. I wanted that to be a part of the care that I provided, and I couldn't do that in any other way. So I do feel like the independent clinic movement, particularly feminist clinics, are really important and critical in exposing potential folks who are going to be working in healthcare, whether they're, working at reception and billing, or even, in the operating room or in the clinic. Most of the people I volunteered with back in the 90s are now in healthcare: midwives, nurse practitioners, doctors. And they don't all provide abortions, but like Lewis said in the movie, they're all supportive, and we need people in all those different areas. I just happen to feel that I was called to do the procedure myself. And I'm really grateful that Jan has been willing to tell our story, because it is something that has tended to be in the shadows for so long. The last thing I want to say is just I want to recognize the providers who have been taken from us. When Jan was just talking, it reminded me about George Tiller, and I did have the privilege of working in his former clinic in Wichita, Kansas, and I think he really embodied the spirit of what an abortion provider is, and for many people, and he was someone who was very good at talking about the complexity of abortion and not really ever knowing why different people make the decisions they make, and that that's okay. And I was reflecting on that because of the themes in the film about talking about the doctors just being the technicians traditionally, and how the patriarchy in medicine has not been supportive of people, particularly pregnant people. So I just wanted to recognize that he was a pioneer in that area, and he was a Kansas cis straight Christian white man, and so he did that, and so anyone can, I think. They work hard enough on their heart. So I just wanted to recognize him, and that's a good segue for you to listen to the wonderful Judith Arcana.
Thank you, thank you. Now I'm thinking about George Tiller, actually, who was not a Jane, but still did a real good job. I remember meeting him. He was here in Portland for something, and the conversation was really started by me because he had these fabulous cowboy boots. And I said, wow, I love your boots. And that was actually the beginning of our conversation. After about 5 minutes, we realized that we were both sitting there in those chairs waiting because we were about to be talking about being abortionists. But at the moment, it was all about the cowboy boots. Yeah, I loved them too. Okay, so I'm a Jane, as was already noted, and I think even was on the screen. And I was happy to be invited by Jan to be part of this film, although I have never been part of the regulars, so to speak, except as a fan or in moments like this when I work with folks who are part of the deal. We were part of the underground, and of course, as I'm sure everyone in this theater knows, the underground is growing rapidly as we are here today because of the Supreme Court's horrific decision. And because what that means is that no matter how terrible stuff was before, now in this country, it is even more frightening and difficult in many, many, many places to get abortion health care. So folks want to know often what it was like before. And one of the things that I always say, maybe some of you have even heard me say this on other occasions, actually, when people say phrases like, oh, we're going back, I always say, no, 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 we're not going back. It's worse now. Because the mindset in this country now has been quite deliberately created by political movement, both people in office and people in the streets, who want, by the political right wing and the anti-abortion movement, and the use the political right wing has made of the anti-abortion movement, and the kind of quote-unquote learning or education or teaching about what abortion is that is now not absorbed, luckily enough, by everyone, but is heard by damn near everyone, is what has been manufactured in the past 50 years about the practice of abortion health care. And that was not true when the Janes were operating. Granted, we were felons, there's no question. And when we were busted, we were scared big time, especially the 7 of us. I was one of the 7 who were cracked. But the mindset, the vibe, the attitudes, the politics that we now live within did not yet exist. And here in Portland, or here in Oregon for that matter, it's not just about Portland, I'm sure a lot of you have read books about the folks who practiced abortion health care in the first half and the middle of the 20th century when abortion was illegal, but the mindset was nowhere near what it is now. People assumed it was difficult, it was expensive, the usual list of concerns, but assumed that if they could do it, they would find people who would perform abortions for them. And those people were not, except in moments of political upheaval, stigmatized for the medical work they were doing. I'm going to add a little bit of a plug for another way of raising money before I stop my time on the mic. I'm a writer. I did not stay in medicine, although I gave it some serious thought. I was listening to what you said in this intro, Andrea. I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a midwife, because I loved the work we were doing, and then I can do abortions, and I can deliver babies, and oh. But the fact of the matter, I finally said, you're a writer, remember? Oh yeah. So I brought with me some copies of this zine called The Jane Bill, named after, of course, the playbill, as you can see, published right here by Eberhard Press, which is a story and a whole bunch of front and back matter, just like in a playbill. And, oh, It's upside down. Uh-oh. And this collection that I wrote of poems around and about motherhood concerns with a serious focus on abortion and a lot of Jane content. And people who have cash in their pockets or bags or whatever, maybe you keep it in your sock, would like to buy these. I have some copies of both, and the money will go to the Lilith Clinic. So that's my little intro talking. Thanks for coming, folks. Now we're going to talk to you about your questions.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm going to ask for 2 audience participants here. I see Heather. Heather, if you don't mind, over to your left, there is a sound system with a roaming mic over there. It's a cordless mic. If you don't mind bringing it up for Tova. Thanks, Tova. Feel free to take pictures and videos, just be polite about it. But would anybody like to go? You can raise your hands and I will call on you and we'll have Tova come bring you the mic. I see somebody straight in the back in the center. We also ask that you just keep the questions centered, focused, keep comments brief so that way we can hear from multiple people today. Thank you.
My question is really about LGBTQ people and trans people who seem to be missing from the abortion conversation. Since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, all I have heard is this is not safe for women. But I am a non-binary person with a uterus who may someday need an abortion. But yet I don't feel like I'm part of that conversation. So what are we doing to, I guess, fix that so that way LGBTQ people and trans people feel safe accessing abortion care?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Anybody on the panel would like to answer first?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So a few comments. The Cedar River Clinics does do extensive trans care, and we did want to include that in the film, that the focus on pregnant people, that suggests, that acknowledges that not all pregnant people are biologically female, male.
Don't identify as male gender.
Don't identify
Or female gender. I
female
apologize.
gender. But I think the larger point was that what's driving the anti-abortion movement or the anti-abortion forces is a very rigid patriarchal view of gender that excludes LGBTQ people, trans people, and that it's a worldview that is repressive. And so that, I think, is an important part of what we were trying to say here.
I was just going to say that it's very important for those of us who are not LGBTQ and or trans folks that we are paying attention to the rapid education and change in both thinking and language. And this film was not made very recently, although it's kind of recent, but that's how fast consciousness is rising in this society, that it's not yet in this film, but it's here. And when I talk about abortion, I always now with education, talk about people with uteruses. Anybody with a uterus can get pregnant. Anybody with a uterus might need an abortion for that particular situation. And not all of us are swift. Not all of us are quick to change our thinking and our words, but a lot of us are working on it.
Very quickly, I would also add that I'm very plugged into the national conversation with reproductive health providers, particularly now because there's a lot of support needed by folks who are practicing in states where they literally cannot do their jobs right now. And LGBTQ care is a big part of that conversation. There are a lot of providers who provide both abortion care and transgender care and have done a lot of training to try to integrate those services because of the lack of service. I know that Planned Parenthood actually has started doing a lot to provide that care, particularly in communities that don't have for instance, academic institutions and things like that. So I do think there's a sort of a Venn diagram within the reproductive health community, because it does all tie together under like what Willie Parker was saying about the threat to the patriarchy, quote unquote, as well as the idea that, you know, we all realize that the Dobbs decision was really just a beginning of what the folks in our country who are so determined to take away autonomy, it applies to, I mean, the conversation is already happening. People are trying to deny parents from taking care of their own children who are either non-binary or transgender or gender fluid. And the conversation about, you know, I work in the addiction medicine field as well, and the conversation about how people use drugs and how they're able to care for themselves and not necessarily follow an agenda that someone else decided for them. So it really is it is an umbrella that many things fall under and are tied together, and I appreciate that you brought that up.
Yeah, thank you again for your question. I also thought that it was an interesting question because prior to Roe overturning this year, we had states like Missouri and Idaho passing bills to try to remove trans people's rights in medical care and access. I would say really quick too that Portland DSA does have a reproductive rights subcommittee that works very closely with our queer and trans healthcare subcommittee because the issues are very, very interconnected and they overlap. So thank you. Any other questions at the moment? Straight over here.
Hi there. There are some states that allow advanced practice nurse practitioners to be abortion providers. Oregon is one of them. Are there any avenues in Portland for a specifically nurse midwife to find an internship or fellowship in that abortion clinics setting, or are there any opportunities that you know of?
Well, I don't specifically, I'm not aware of any fellowships or that specific internships for advanced practice nurses or including CNMs. I will say that a lot of abortion training happens outside of the academic setting. To be honest, I mean, most of what I learned about providing abortion care, I did not learn in medical school or even residency. Some of the technical things I did learn, obviously, trained to be a surgeon. But besides that, the majority of what I learned in sort of a mentoring kind of setting, basically, where you talk to someone and you say, hey, will you show me how to do this? And it really is like that. It's not simple, but that's a big part of it. So I think, networking and getting involved with getting to know local providers and finding someone who's willing to train you is probably the best route to go. And that includes anybody that's in a state that allows both abortion at all and allows non-MD or DO practitioners to provide that care.
I want to just add a point about that, because sometimes it comes up, the question of why is this our bodies are doctors as opposed to our bodies are providers. And in Oregon, nurse practitioners can provide abortion services in many states. Physicians it's limited to physicians. There's a whole struggle over who can provide abortion services around the country, but I wanted to bring doctors into the title because doctors have been primarily the targets who've been assassinated over this work. They're the main target of the anti-abortion forces. They go after physicians. When you go into clinics, you really have to have the doctors on board. But, and in Oregon, I did reach out to the Nurses Association at the Oregon Health Sciences Center, but they were not comfortable being part of this project because doctors have, especially medical centers, have a kind of authority where they could, you know, not everyone wanted to be part of this film. You know, there was a whole process of being part of it. But the ones who were committed to kind of coming out on this. And I think they also, for me, it was an important criterion that they weren't only into their authority as physicians, but they saw themselves as providers. So all of the people who do this work, whether they're nurses, people working at the reception desk, they have a kind of democratic ethos that is a critique of an earlier model that certainly I grew up with or was trained under as a registered nurse, where the doctor rules.
Yeah.
So
And certainly
I think it was a way of
present
kind of reclaiming the position of doctor in this through feminist principles. Judith, did you want
I
to?
just want to say that what you just said is a presence in your film. That's not a surprise that it would be, but that the film feels like what you just said.
Thank you for that question. Down here.
Thank you so much for the film, Jan. I was curious, based on something that Judith said about the moment that we're in right now is worse than when we were before. And, as we are all aware, Roe was won by a militant and mass feminist movement, in the streets, continually creating that political upheaval that you discussed as, one of the reasons why you were targeted as an abortionist at that time. I'm curious, in your view of the movement currently, what is missing to bring that militant aspect to, really take back reproductive justice from this militant right-wing political class that we're currently fighting?
I don't know if I would say that there is something missing so much as what I think about so often when I'm either reading the news or having even a private conversation is that little speech I included in my remarks about the difference between now and 50 years ago is not in many people's minds. So that we do hear folks saying often, oh, we're going back, and well, I already told you what I think about that, and I think that what's missing is the actual history then, if there is, in fact, something missing. Maybe people are doing it and you and I just don't know, but it's, I think, extremely important to point out whenever we have opportunities to point out this, what I'm considering historical fact, that the anti-abortion movement has been wildly successful in its deliberate actions of the past 5 decades. And that is where we live now, sociologically, culturally speaking. And in many ways, one of the things that makes me happy is, and it is indeed possible to be happy in this moment, one of those things is that people far younger than I am, as well as people my age and everything in between, are recognizing this very thing that I'm going on about in response to your query and saying, wait a minute, this and this and that, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's actually very different, and it's different for these reasons, and it's dangerously different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So paying that attention, and also taking street-level action, and by street-level action, I don't just mean marching in the streets, although marching in the streets is always a good thing. We learned that decades ago from the civil rights movement in this nation. But also, not that I would ever encourage anyone to break a law. Also, never would I do that. But knowing that people will anyway, no matter what their elders say to them, we We ought to do, we should do what we think is right and valuable and useful to do. This is a state in which we had, this is my most frequently used example, the lash law. Not only did this state create itself by making it illegal for people of color, specifically black people, to come to this region and live here, but if they did, the law was they would be publicly whipped, hence the title, the lash law. Now that was a law, and I always use it as one of, there are others, one of the examples, because law in itself is someone's idea, someone or some group of someone's who had the power to make it law. That's all it is. Some of them are good ideas. Some of them are not good ideas, like the lash law. I went on a little longer than I thought.
I could listen to you all day. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to keep it brief and just say I think it's a combination of factors. Coming from the perspective of an abortion provider, I will say that we're exhausted. We've been fighting this stuff for decades. I mean, all the restrictions, you saw it in the film, that's not new. And so some of us feel like we've been screaming into the void for a long time. And also understanding there are literally people right now calling abortion clinics in states where it is currently illegal to have an abortion, and they are not aware that it is illegal for them to have an abortion in their state. Because people have other things on their minds. Because COVID, because economic insecurity, because gas is really expensive, because people can't get a living wage, like all these different things, insurance companies. So it's, until it's right in your face and that's your thing that you have to do that week, it's really not as important, even though you may have an opinion about that it should be legal and it should be safe and all those things. That's not what is driving the average American person right now, in my experience talking to patients every day. The same with COVID. I mean, it's just on a different level. But I think the perception of what people in this country support as a right versus what people are able or willing to do with their time to be activists about that are very different. And the other thing I'll add is that one of the ways I think it's worse now, and I agree with Judith on that, is that we live in a surveillance state, right? So we can't, I mean, everything you do can be tracked. We all have cell phones, there's cameras everywhere. It's really hard to get away with things that I think are necessary to do to really wake up a whole country and say this is not acceptable. Because if you look at what was happening back in the 60s, or even during like the civil rights movement, I mean, people were risking their lives and people died and people were doing things, and at the same time, there were things that could be done that you couldn't do now unless you're very, very, very secretive. And there are many things going on in this country right now, many that I don't know about and I shouldn't know about because they need to be, people are doing things. It's just not public and it shouldn't be public. Because as long as people are able to access reproductive health care, I personally don't care how it's being done. I just think it needs to be done. Again, I mean, I am going to advocate that people break laws because I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to achieve this. So, I have put myself in a position where, I mean, I have, I'm state licensed in in 2 states as a medical doctor, and certain reasons why I can't be out in the street throwing Molotov cocktails. But I'd be willing to make some if anybody needs so
Just a kitchen event, really.
yes, we all have our place. I'm just gonna say that.
Well, we have one panelist who is may or may not be for breaking laws. We have one panelist who is for breaking laws. Jan?
Well, movements require a lot of creative strategies, but I also want to say that for me, a commitment in this film was not to just focus on the crazy evangelical preachers or the horrors of the South, but what we're facing here in the Northwest, where the bishop's ethical and religious directives, I always choke on that term, guide what happens in healthcare facilities. Many of you are Providence Healthcare. You have a Providence Healthcare plan. I think you should call them and say you are going to cancel your plan. Because if you go into a Providence hospital and about half of the beds in this state in Washington, and the docs in Washington said it's worse now with mergers in Washington even than when this film was made. If you're having trouble with the pregnancy, you may risk your life going into that hospital, because as long as there's a heartbeat, they will privilege that fetus over your life. And so I think we can put a lot of pressure on Providence.
I think the pressure, that, sorry to interrupt, has to go on to employers as well, because most people don't have a choice of what their insurance is. But I think on a political level, Providence does have a contract with Oregon Health Plan, and so they are one of the providers. And so that's a place where actually there could be some successful action and lobbying, is saying, going to the state and the OHA and talking to your state legislature and saying, we don't, this is unacceptable that the state of Oregon has on their, Medicaid panel the choice of being, of choosing a Catholic provider. And in many cases, people don't even choose that, it's assigned to them. And these are the most vulnerable people in our state. So I think going to the source, as opposed to, I'm on Providence Insurance through my employer. I have no other option. But I try to talk to people about it as much as possible in terms of, educating people about where they do have a voice.
I think part of it is the disconnect between laws that are passed and what's involved in implementation, like the Reproductive Health Equity Act that was passed here in 2017, went into law in 2019. Providence has not, that requires a full range of reproductive health services, including contraception and abortion. Providence has not complied with that. They've had there's an audit 2 years ago that showed they didn't comply. So they have all of these ways, workarounds with their lawyers. And so I think we can organize around those issues as well.
Definitely. Thank you all. I think we have time for 2 more quick questions. Right center. Thank you, Tova.
Thank you. That's a hot mic. I recently went to a concert that had nothing to do with abortion. A very feminist artist, but she said partway through the show, "Who loves abortion?" And because it's here in Portland, Oregon, the crowd went wild, everybody clapped. And she shared that she didn't get an abortion because she had to, or something happened that was terrible, she said, because she wanted one, and everybody cheered and exclaimed. And I loved the moments in the film that talked about how a lot of people actually see so much relief and gratitude, and Jude was saying it is possible to be happy, and I was just wondering if y'all could speak a little bit to your experience from kind of the provider side, the joy that can come from giving people control over their lives back, and helping them to have control over their body in a world that doesn't want to let them have that. And my mother had an abortion and talks all the time about how her life would have been completely different if she had her first baby when she was 19, and how grateful she was that she had the means to do that in the 70s. So I'd just love to hear about some of the joy.
I bet everybody can. Shall we just make a line of it here?
Well, yes, go ahead.
I would just say that's part of the reason I brought up George Tiller, because I was exposed to him as a medical student, and even before that, actually, when I worked at the Feminist Women's Health Center. And the first thing I ever heard about him was that he made buttons for his entire staff that they wore around the clinic all the time that said, "Abortion is A-OK." And I remember that. I mean, this was 27 years ago that I heard about this. And I remember being like, yes, that guy, like, that's how we need to do it. And I think that the more that that conversation happens is really important because, like Leo said in the movie, he said, when we leave a void, then other people fill it with a false narrative. And I would say, you know, I have had so many experiences providing abortion care where everyone in the room was laughing, and we would always play music, and you know, everything's so portrayed as so serious and things like that. At the same time, I mean, people who know me know I have a lot of stories, and many of them are that positive experience, and part of that comes from because there's such a stigma and because there's so much fear-mongering out there, particularly from the crisis pregnancy centers and folks like that, is that people come into abortion clinics thinking they're going to be harmed, treated terribly, and when they're not, what happens to their demeanor, and they realize, oh, these people respect me, they care about me, they want me to have a good experience, then they're able to feel comfortable expressing that they're happy and they're experiencing a good moment in their life because they're able to walk out that door and a huge problem that's been weighing on them for weeks or months is gone.
Yeah, I would just say that one of the tremendous sources of joy in my life is my history as a Jane. Not only when I was actually working in the abortion service in the early 1970s, but in the years since then, because the memories have not gone away, and because there are connections between me and other Janes, one of whom did my abortion, and I remember the women, and they were women in those days, and little girls, the youngest one, 11, that I was the quote-unquote counselor for. Naturally, she was with her mother. All of those people that I had very closely related to what Andrea was just saying, intimate conversations and hand touchings and exchanges with over and over again every week for the months and years that the service was working, that's now in me. And that is a source of many things, including my politics, obviously, around healthcare and other stuff, but also joy, like what you're asking in this question. And it's crucial. You can't do this work without the joy. You gotta have that to make you go on and on with it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that lovely question. We have time for one more. We have to be a little brief because we're out of time. We'll do one more question. Anyone with a question? Oh, it looks like Tova's found someone.
Hi, one of the things that's different today and that has started coming up in social media conversations that I see is the availability of medication abortions and also sort of like post-sex birth control that isn't actually abortion, although it directly tries to portray it as that. But I want to connect this to the thing that Dr. Shivarini said about people needing to do things in secret, because some of the stuff I'm seeing on social media is making it sound like this is a very simple kind of thing. But like, I know that the Janes at a certain point actually started performing abortions as well as bringing people to doctors, at least some abortions. And I'm curious about like what sort of training and thought went into doing that and how that might relate to people who wanted to be looking at medication as a route to abortion in places where it becomes illegal, and what we need to think about in that way.
The Jane thing is probably a longer answer than we have time for right now, but I would turn you toward another documentary film for information, which is called The Janes. And just tell you that we were very well, those of us who chose to do the medical work, were very well trained by the best abortionist we worked with. He was terrific. And like anybody else who's learning medical practice, we learned well, those of us who wish to be medical practitioners. But there must be more.
Yeah, I want to say a bit about the distinction between surgical and medical abortions. I mean, I think all of us are very supportive of making medical abortions and telemedicine available, but I came out of the feminist clinic movement where it was not about just taking a pill somewhere and ending a pregnancy, which I totally support, but it was about these places where you came and actually if you have a surgical abortion, early trimester, you're done with it in a few minutes. And it's not, you know, there's a whole thing with medical abortion of dealing with it, having childcare, you know, or support for several days. And I think it's important to defend the clinics and surgical abortions because these are places where you come together and you find support of other providers. It's not just a private thing you have to do and find something in your own home. And I wanted to also capture kind of the sensuality and kind of the intimacy of abortion, of how you have to be, to do this work, you have to be kind of comfortable with bodies, with women's bodies and sometimes the joy and relief, but sometimes the sadness that emerges. It doesn't mean you're traumatized because you're sad. And so I think it's important to still defend clinics, getting back to the Lilith Clinic. They provide medical abortion, but I think it's also important to defend surgical abortion that if you go beyond the first trimester, you have to have a surgical abortion anyway. Because, or well, up to 12, 13 weeks.
Well,
I mean,
when it's legal, yes.
yeah. So I think there's kind of an easy thing that passes. Well, you can just make medications available, which are important and are part of the abortion care. But I think,
yeah, I agree with you. I think it is already and going to be an important part of underground abortion care. And I'm glad that we have those options. And at the same time, it's also very unfortunate that the conversation is, well, at least we have that, it's better than nothing. Because there are a lot of people that are going to have complications that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And it just sucks that that's where we're at. I do agree that it allows a lot of people to at least get to a point where they can seek medical services and not appear that they're having an abortion.
They have to be really good liars, and I'm not kidding.
Well, and it's been happening even before. I mean, I've seen patients in that situation. Yeah, people just need to develop a different skill set, as I like to say.
would you say it's also important to defend surgical abortions?
Oh, yes.
Oh, absolutely. Oh,
Yes.
yeah. No, we should, yes, absolutely. 100%. What I'm saying is that in the situation we are in right now,
Yeah.
there are states where no one can get a surgical abortion. They can't even get a procedure in a hospital when their fetus has lost all their fluid and getting ready to die, and the parent is getting ready to die. So, yes, I think it should be available everywhere. Because it's not, I think there is a role for medication abortion to play in people accessing care that are obviously the most minoritized people in our society who can't get on a private jet and fly to another state and have an abortion.
Indeed. Also, I would add, taking that pill doesn't just make the pregnancy disappear. That's not what happens. What happens, even with very early pregnancies, is essentially a miscarriage. This is not nothing. Taking a pill does not turn it into nothing. Further along, more difficulty, but even in front, not so easy.
Well, thank you all for your questions today.
And thank you to Hollywood Theater and Portland DSA that also is very active in supporting reproductive justice. That was an important part of the theme, the film as well, is to bring in Black feminist thought, reproductive justice, and the right to have children and care for them, as well as the right to end pregnancies. So,
And please support the Lilith Clinic.
yeah, amen.
Buy books and the money will go to the Lilith Clinic.
Okay, thank you all for
Thank you.
coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for your invaluable work and insight. Thank you all for coming today. Last reminder, there's tables out front. There's a Portland DSA table. There is a Lilith Clinic table. Check it out. We're still collecting funds for the Lilith Clinic, so if you'd like to scan the code up front. We're collecting funds all weekend. Thank you all for being here. Solidarity.